The morning it happened, I was on my second cup of coffee and thinking about nothing. That's the part I keep coming back to. Not some errand I was running in my head. Not a problem I was chewing on. Nothing. Just the street and the steam coming off the mug, and the particular quiet of a Thursday in early spring, when most people have already left for work, and the ones who haven't are still inside. 3 police cars pulled up across the street. Not fast, no lights. The kind of arrival that has been discussed and decided and timed in a room somewhere, before anyone got in a vehicle. 2 officers walked to the front door. One stayed by the cars with a clipboard, which I remember specifically, the clipboard, held at his side, the way you hold something you're not using yet but will need. The door opened before they knocked. She was already there. She was wearing the green cardigan, the one that's slightly too large, the one she'd had for as long as I'd known her. She told me once she found it at a market in Edinburgh 40 years ago, and it had never quite fit right, and she'd never cared. She stepped outside. Her hands went in front of her. Nobody asked her to do this. She just did it. And she was walked to one of the cars, not roughly, not gently, in the specific way that you walk somewhere when you know where you are going and you've accepted it, and they put her in the back, and one of the officers spoke to the one with the clipboard for a moment, and then all 3 cars left. The street went quiet again, the same quiet as before, same light on the pavement, same crabapple tree 2 doors down just starting to show buds. My coffee had gone cold in my hand. I don't know how long I stood at that window, long enough that the coffee was well past drinking by the time I set it down. They had been looking for her for 11 years. I had known her for 20. I've been trying to figure out ever since what that means. Whether I'm a bad judge of character, or whether character is more complicated than I thought. I haven't figured it out. I'm not sure the question has an answer I can reach. Let me back up. Let me tell you about the street first, and about her, and then I'll tell you about the 11 years, because the order matters. You have to know who I thought she was before you can understand what I've been sitting with. My husband and I moved here 23 years ago with a 2-year-old and another one on the way. We'd stretched ourselves to afford the house, and I remember the specific anxiety of that first year. The mortgage that felt like a number from a different person's life. The ancient boiler we couldn't replace yet. The way I kept running the budget in my head while I was supposed to be sleeping. I'm an accountant. Running numbers in your head while you're supposed to be sleeping is an occupational hazard. The street was what sold us on the house, more than the house itself. It's one of those streets that photographs badly. The houses are close together, the gardens are small, there's nothing architecturally distinctive. But it had something that I have since been unable to name precisely, a quality of being a neighborhood rather than just a street of houses. People knew each other. Not in a prying way, not in the way of small towns in the worst sense, just... They knew each other's names. They waved. When someone got sick, food appeared. She was part of that. She was a significant part of that. Her name, I'm going to call her Margaret, because that's not her name, and I have reasons for not using her name that I'll explain when I get to them. Margaret had lived on the street for 6 years before we arrived. She was in her early 50s then. She lived alone in the house across the street, and she had the kind of settled into herself quality that some women get in their 50s when they've stopped waiting for their life to begin and have simply begun living it. She kept a good garden. She baked on Saturdays. You could smell it through her open kitchen window. She knew everyone's name and everyone's approximate situation, and she never weaponized this knowledge, which is rarer than it sounds. The first time she appeared at my door was 6 weeks after we moved in. The baby had arrived. The 2-year-old had decided to respond to this event by not sleeping through the night for 3 weeks running, and I was operating on a level of exhausted that felt almost scientific in its depth. She brought a casserole dish, round, blue, with a white lid. She said, "I remember what the first months are like." She said, "Eat something warm." She said, "The dish comes back whenever." And then she left, because she understood that what I needed was not company. I cried after I closed the door. Not dramatically, just the specific release of someone who has been holding it together very hard for several weeks and has just been given a small, targeted act of kindness by someone who did not have to. That was the first time she brought the dish. It would not be the last. The block parties were her idea. The last Saturday of July every year, a long table down the middle of the street. She started it 8 years before we arrived, and she'd been running it ever since. Not because anyone asked her to, but because it was something she'd started and it was hers, and the street had come to depend on it the way you come to depend on things that happen annually and seem small and are not. She organized the table. She sent the reminder cards in early July. She brought the same potato salad every year, with green onion and dill, and it was good. Genuinely good. The kind of dish that's gone by 10 minutes in. The recipe is in my recipe box. She wrote it out on one of her note cards. She always used good stationery, the kind of small aesthetic commitment that said something about her. In her very precise handwriting. I found the note card 2 weeks after the arrest, when I was looking for something else. I pulled it out. I read it. I put it back. 23 years on this street. That's what I'm asking you to hold in your mind as I tell you the rest of it. Not just that I knew her, but the specific texture of knowing someone for 23 years from across the street. The accumulated accumulation of ordinary contact. The way you know someone's routines without ever deciding to learn them. The way her kitchen light tells you whether it's a night she went to bed early or a night she's still up reading. The specific intimacy of proximity over time, which is different from the intimacy of closeness, but is not less real. That's what I had. 23 years of that, and I had no idea. The arrest was in March. By April I had done something I haven't told many people about, because it sounds strange, and I understand why it sounds strange. But I'm an accountant, and it's what I know how to do with a problem that I can't resolve. I sat down at my kitchen table with a blank piece of paper, and I went back through 23 years, methodically, looking for the moment I should have known. I was fair about it. I tried to be. I only counted things I would have been able to read as anomalous at the time, not things that made sense only in retrospect. I was a professional about it. I applied my actual professional standards. I found 3 things. 3, in 23 years. There was a conversation we'd had, maybe 15 years ago, where she mentioned she'd moved around a fair amount before settling here. And when I asked where she'd lived, she gave a list that skipped a decade in a way I'd noticed, and then immediately stopped noticing, because the conversation moved on. We didn't sleep again that night. All 3 of us sat up until 6:30 and talked about it in the careful, measured tones of people trying very hard to be rational about something that had not been rational. Madison cried. She was frightened in a way that was different from the way I was frightened. She wasn't frightened of what might have happened. She was frightened of herself, of the gap, of the things she'd done in the time between closing her eyes and opening them when I said her name. By 9 in the morning, we had decided she should move rooms. Not because she was dangerous, we didn't use that word, but because everyone would feel better with her in a single room where she wasn't going to wander somewhere and wake up holding something sharp. The RA on our floor, Priya, helped with the paperwork. Madison moved out the following afternoon. She took her bedding and her laundry hamper and her 3 succulents, and she moved to room 412, 1 floor up. A single. Her new neighbor had gone home for a long weekend. Before she left, she hugged me for a long time. She said she was sorry. I said she didn't need to be sorry. She said she was going to see someone about it, a sleep specialist. She'd already made the appointment. I said that was good. Then she went upstairs. That was 2 days before the watermelon. 1 day before Sophia. I didn't know about Sophia until the next morning. The morning of the watermelon. The morning after we'd all sat in the dark and not spoken. I got up, I showered, I ate breakfast, I went to my 9 o'clock lecture on macroeconomics and sat in the 3rd row and wrote down everything the professor said without retaining a single word of it. Somewhere in the back of my skull, underneath the professor's voice and the scratch of my own pen, something was turning slowly. Not forming yet, just turning. It ended the way those friendships can end. Completely, publicly, with collateral damage to other friendships, and with the specific cruelty that 16-year-olds sometimes deploy without fully understanding they're deploying it. Kara wasn't eating properly. She was sleeping 11 hours and still looking exhausted. She wouldn't talk to me about it in any specific way, which was correct 16-year-old behavior, and I was trying to respect this while also being unable to do nothing. On a Wednesday, midweek, without anyone having told her anything, I certainly hadn't because I'd been trying to give Kara her privacy, Margaret appeared at our front door at 4 in the afternoon, holding the casserole dish. She said, "I heard it's been a difficult week." She said, "I thought everyone could use something warm." She handed me the dish. She did not ask what had happened. She did not offer opinions or a framework or advice. She said, "If your daughter wants to talk to someone who isn't her mother, my door is open." Then she left. Kara went across the street 2 days later. She was there for an hour. She came back and would not tell me what they'd talked about, which was correct, and I didn't ask, which was hard, but correct. She seemed better. Not fixed, better. The specific easing of a person who has been holding something too heavy alone and has found someone to help them hold it for an hour. I thanked Margaret over the fence the next morning. She said, "She's a good girl. She'll be all right." She was right. I've thought about that hour a lot in the past months. Kara at 16, sitting in Margaret's front room, talking about something she couldn't tell her mother. Margaret listening. Whatever she said, that helped. I've thought about it and I've tried to figure out what it means now, and I can't. I can't figure out what it means because it means two things simultaneously that don't resolve. The help was real, and the person who gave it was also someone who had done serious harm in another city under another name. I can't make these two things cohere. I've stopped trying. The detective who handled our end of the investigation was named Okafor. He had a specific quality that I associated, the more I dealt with him, with people who have spent a long time working cases that take a long time. A kind of patience that wasn't passive, an economy with words that came from having spent years listening more than talking. He carried a small notebook. He never used his phone to take notes, which I found interesting. Old habit or a preference or something else. I didn't ask. He came to talk to me 3 days after the arrest. We sat in my kitchen. I made tea because it was something to do. He asked me a series of questions about Margaret, her habits, her routines, her visitors, her habits with visitors specifically. I answered honestly and carefully, which is how I answer things professionally. I said what I'd observed. I said when I was interpreting rather than observing. He seemed to appreciate this distinction. He wrote things in the small notebook. At the end of that first meeting, as he was putting his coat on, he mentioned, carefully, with the restraint of someone who is giving you a fact and not an editorial, that she had lived somewhere else before coming here. Another city, another decade, another street where she had been a good neighbor and had been trusted and liked. He said this neutrally. He moved on. I sat with that information for 3 days before I could talk to anyone about anything, because here is the question it generates, and I want to be precise about it, because precision is how I think. Was the pattern of good neighboring something she was good at because she'd practiced it? Something she'd developed and refined? Or was it genuine both times? Real on this street and real on the other one? Can something be genuinely felt and also repeated with deliberate care? I know professionally that people do things that are both genuine and strategic simultaneously. I've seen this. It's not a contradiction, it's a complexity. I know it's possible. But I don't know how to live on the same street as the evidence of it, which is a different kind of knowing. I kept coming back to the casserole dish. Round, blue, white lid. It's in my cabinet. It has been there since the arrest, sitting on the second shelf with my other things. Not returned because there's nowhere to return it to, and not thrown away because I can tell you why I didn't return it. I can't fully explain why I didn't throw it away. It's just there. I've opened the cabinet and seen it probably 300 times in the past months, and every time I see it, I have a version of the same thought, which is not so much a thought as a feeling that is too large for the word thought. Every time I see it, I put my hand on it briefly, and then I close the cabinet. I opened the cabinet in early April, about 3 weeks after the arrest, looking for the colander. The colander is on the third shelf, and I knew it was on the third shelf, but I opened the second shelf first, which I don't usually do, and I saw the dish, and I stood there for a moment with my hand on the cabinet door. Then I closed the cabinet without taking anything out. I found the colander in a different cabinet. I have no memory of putting it there. The card arrived. Not from her, not yet, that came later. But what I found, around the same time I was going through the kitchen cabinets and not finding things, was a card in the pile of papers on my desk. Her handwriting on the envelope. I recognized it immediately, the precise, slightly formal lettering. I'd received cards from her over the years, thank you notes, Christmas cards, the kind of correspondence that some people keep up and most people don't anymore. I opened it. It was dated 6 months before the arrest. Good cardstock, the kind she always used. And it said, she was grateful to have lived on this street, that our family was the kind of neighbor she had hoped for when she moved here, that she hoped we knew that. I found the copy I'd made of the reply I sent. I keep copies, professional habit, which said, we're the lucky ones to have you across the street. I wrote that. I meant it. I still mean it, in the sense that I meant it when I wrote it, and the fact of having meant it hasn't changed, and I don't know what to do with that. 6 months before the arrest, she wrote what reads, in retrospect, like a very specific kind of goodbye. Whether she knew something was coming, whether she'd been contacted, whether the investigation was closing in, whether she could feel a horizon she didn't discuss, I don't know and probably won't know. Maybe it was a goodbye. Maybe it was exactly what it looked like. An older woman, mid-70s, thinking about time and what she has and wanting to say something about it. Maybe it was both simultaneously. I'm an accountant. For 17 years, I have been the person who looks at a column of numbers and identifies the one that doesn't quite fit the pattern, not because it's wrong on its face, but because something about its relationship to the other numbers is slightly off. I am professionally good at this. I have won professional recognition for this. I did not apply this skill to my neighbor. I didn't think to. I didn't have any reason to. I've asked myself whether not having a reason to counts as an excuse. I've been going back and forth on this for months. I think it counts as an explanation. I'm not sure whether an explanation and an excuse are different, or whether that's a distinction I'm drawing to make myself feel better. The card is in a drawer in my desk now, the drawer that's specifically for things I don't know what to do with. The second meeting with Okafor was at the station, which I'd asked for specifically because I wanted to be in a place that wasn't my kitchen. The station was what you'd expect, function over everything else. Good lighting that was not flattering, a conference room with a long table and chairs that didn't quite match. Someone had left a coffee cup on the table. It had been there a while. I noticed this because I notice specific things when I'm in situations I don't have a framework for. He told me more about the 11 years. He was professional and informative, and he paced it in a way that said he'd done this before, given someone information about a person they trusted and knew how much was too much at once. He gave me the shape of it. What had happened in the other city, in broad terms, not details. He was precise about what I needed to know versus what was mine to have. It was serious. It was old. And it had generated an investigation that had taken 11 years and a great deal of coordination before it came to a quiet Thursday morning on my street. He was building a case. He needed my cooperation, and I was going to cooperate. Not because I was compelled to, but because I'd made that decision as soon as he'd come to my door. Because cooperation was the right thing. And also because I am, professionally, a person who documents things carefully and says what she knows and distinguishes it from what she's inferring. And whatever else was happening with my emotional life, I knew how to do that part. He asked me his questions. I answered carefully. I gave him the timeline he needed about her routines and her visitors and the things I'd observed from across a street for 20 years. When he asked about the gap I'd mentioned, the decade she'd skipped in a conversation 15 years ago, he made a note that felt more significant than other notes. I watched him write it. Then he asked, "How would you describe her character?" I thought about that for a moment. I thought about what I could honestly say and what I could honestly not say, and where those two things were in tension. I said, for 20 years, she was kind. She was reliable. She was the person who showed up when things went wrong. I said, I can't speak to 11 years ago in a different city. I said, I don't know how to reconcile those two things, but I can't say one of them isn't true just because the other one is true. He wrote this down. He said, that's useful. I don't know how it was useful. I don't know how a statement that doesn't resolve into a simple verdict is useful to someone building a case. Maybe it's useful as context. Maybe it's useful because jurors are people too, and people understand complexity better than lawyers sometimes assume. I don't know. I gave him what was true. I accepted that what was true would be used in a process I couldn't fully control, which is an uncomfortable thing to accept, and I accepted it anyway. On the way home, I sat in my car in the station car park for about 10 minutes before I drove anywhere. The block party was 3 weeks after the arrest, late July, last Saturday, the way it had always been. Some of the neighbors had been in contact about it, by text, in the way people discuss things now, and there had been a conversation about whether to do it at all, and the conclusion, arrived at organically without anyone really deciding it, was that they would. I think for some people it was a statement, a refusal to be changed. I think for others it was easier than doing the work of not doing it. For me, it was something I couldn't name. I went because I had been going for 18 years and my body went. Someone had set up the table. Long table down the middle of the street, the way it always was. People brought things. Pasta salad, bread, a fruit thing, several desserts. The table looked full and complete. And there was no potato salad. Nobody mentioned this. Nobody said, "There's no potato salad this year." Nobody acknowledged the absence. We were all navigating it together, the way you navigate something that everyone knows about and nobody has found language for yet. The way a table can be both a table full of food and also a record of what's not on it. I stood at the edge of it. I had a plate of food I wasn't eating. I was looking at the long table in the late July light, which is always a particular gold-going orange at that time of year on this street. The crabapple tree throwing a specific shadow across the middle of the table. And I was thinking about Kara. Kara at 16, walking across this street, going through that front door, sitting in a room I had never been in. I'd been in Margaret's kitchen a dozen times, but never the front room. And talking to someone for an hour and coming back better. I was thinking about the casserole dish, 9 times in 20 years. When my son had pneumonia at 4 years old, and I was trying to work and manage a sick child, and the pediatrician kept saying, "Wait and see," in a way that felt unbearable. When my mother died. When I had a miscarriage at 38 that I hadn't told many people about, and Margaret appeared at my door the next day with the dish, and didn't ask any questions and didn't offer any context. She simply put it in my hands in the specific manner of someone who understood that presence was the thing required and words would not help. And then she left. 9 times. 9 occasions on which something in my life was bad enough that I needed something warm brought to my door by someone who didn't have to bring it. And each time, the dish appeared. I was standing at the edge of the block party, thinking about the dish, and about Kara, and about 11 years, and another city, and harm done and not accounted for. And I was trying to find the ledger that made these things balance. I'm an accountant. I make things balance. It's not a metaphor, it's a professional skill, a genuine one, and it has shaped how I think about everything. The idea that there is a correct version of the numbers and your job is to find it. This does not balance. I've looked at it from every angle, applied every framework I have, and it does not balance. The goodness is real. The harm is real. They exist in the same person and they do not cancel each other and they do not cohere, and there is no ledger where the columns come out even. A woman I'd known for 20 years helped my daughter through a terrible week by simply being present for an hour and saying whatever she said. I have no idea what she said. It helped. That's what I have. That happened. The context does not unmake it. I know this much. The question I can't answer is whether the context changes it. And I mean specifically, is a genuine kindness from a person who has also done genuine harm still a genuine kindness? And what is the obligation of the recipient of that kindness when she finds out? I've been asking this for months. I don't have an answer. I'm learning, slowly, that I may not get one. The light changed on the table. I put my plate down on a neighbor's garden wall, and I went home. The letter came 4 weeks after the arrest, forwarded through her attorney through approved channels, which Okafor had told me was possible and which I'd said I was willing to receive. 1 page, her handwriting. I knew it immediately. That precise, slightly formal lettering, the same as the note cards in the recipe card in my recipe box. She said she was sorry for any distress. She said she hoped the street was well. She said the time on this street was real to her, every year of it. She didn't say anything about what she'd done. She didn't address the other city, or the investigation, or the 11 years. She said only, it was real. I read the letter 4 times over 2 days. Twice on the first day, twice on the second. On the second reading the first time, I noticed that she'd said years rather than time. Not the time on this street, but every year of it, as if each one mattered separately, which was either more precise or more calculated, and I cannot determine which. I don't know what replying would mean. I thought about it. I've thought about it a lot, and I drafted 3 versions in my head of what I would say. The first was something about the dish. The second was a question I couldn't phrase correctly. The third was nothing. Just, I know. Which is the true thing and also not enough of anything to send. I put the letter in the drawer with the card from 6 months ago. They're in there together now. I know they're in there. I've opened the drawer twice since then, not looking for anything, just opened it and looked at the 2 envelopes and closed it again. The verdict was in the paper on a Tuesday morning, 8 months after the arrest. I read it with my coffee, at the kitchen table, with the window in my peripheral vision. Conviction. The article was careful and thorough, and I read the whole thing, which took about 4 minutes, and then I put the paper down flat on the table and I looked at it for a moment. Then I looked out the window. The house across the street has had a for sale sign since June. I've been looking at it every morning. The garden has been maintained by an estate agent's company. They send someone once a week. And it's fine. The garden is fine. But it's the kind of fine that comes from contracted maintenance rather than someone who actually cares about a garden. And I notice the difference every time I look at it. The primroses she put in along the front path are still there. They're doing well. She put them in 4 years ago. I got up from the table. I opened the cabinet, the second shelf, not the third. I took out the blue casserole dish. I carried it to the sink. I washed it, which was not something it needed. I'd washed it before, multiple times. It was clean. I washed it anyway. The water was hot. The dish is not heavy. It's the kind of ceramic that's lighter than it looks. I dried it with the green dish towel. I set it on the counter. I looked at it for a while, probably 2 or 3 minutes, which is longer than it sounds. Then I put it back in the cabinet. Not because I'd made a decision. I hadn't made a decision. But because putting it back is what I did. It lives in my cabinet now, among my things. I don't know what it is anymore. Whether it's cookware I was lent and can't return, or something that holds 20 years of a specific warmth that was real to me, and that I can't throw away because throwing it away would be a statement I'm not ready to make. I'm not ready to make any statements about it. I'm keeping it until I know what it is. I don't know when that will be. There's the recipe card too, still in the recipe box. Dill and green onion and a specific ratio of mayonnaise to mustard that she'd worked out over years of iteration, she said once. I've thought about making it. I haven't. I don't know if I will. It's in there with the other recipes, in her precise handwriting, and every time I go looking for something in the recipe box, I handle it briefly and put it back. Okafor asked me, at that second meeting, whether I had any questions. It was the end of the meeting, the coat was coming on, the notebook was away. A courtesy question. Most people in my position probably had questions about the case, the logistics, the process. I said, "Do you think she felt any guilt?" He stopped. He thought about this, genuinely, not a pause for show. He said, "I can't know that." He said, "Most people, when they've been living a life for a long time, have found a way to make it cohere for themselves." He said, "I've never met anyone who was able to sustain something for 20 years without believing, on some level, that it was possible to deserve it." I've thought about that answer for a long time. I'm still not sure what it means. Whether deserving the good life requires having made peace with the harm, or whether those two things can coexist without ever communicating with each other inside a person. I don't know how human beings are constructed. I thought I knew. I've been an accountant for 17 years, and I've prided myself on my read of people, professionally, personally, both. I've been reliable at it. I've built a professional reputation on precision. 20 years, across the street. I didn't know. I've decided this is not entirely a personal failure. I've also decided it is not nothing. The space between those two places is where I'm living right now. It's not a comfortable space. It's also not a space I can exit by force of will, by making a decision, by applying the skills I have that have always served me well. Some things are not a ledger. Some things don't balance. Some things you hold for a long time without knowing what you're holding them for. The drawer is still closed. The dish is in the cabinet. The recipe is in the box. The primroses are doing well without her.